Hello again, and welcome to the Baselight Learning Program. This is another of our free weekly training sessions. And today I'm going to be covering the DBS and how it interacts with the Cuts View and other views in Baselight. As always, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat and I'll cover them at the end. And today I've got my Baselight look system set up with a slate control panel. So I've got an example scene set up. So let's get started. DBS stands for dark blue square. As its name implies, it's a blue square, or in most cases it's actually a rectangle, which outlines a chosen thumbnail. It isn't particularly dark, but it is darker than the pale blue colour of the cursor. You can adjust the width of the DBS outline if you want to make it more or less visible by setting the DBS border width control in the general section of the Cuts View, Gallery and Scratchpad preferences. And the range goes from 2 pixels all the way up to 10. And the default is 5, which seems to work okay on most size thumbnails. So the DBS acts as a selector, or a kind of second cursor. However, unlike the timeline cursor, which is used to select frames in the timeline which are fed to the image display, the DBS is used as a shot selector. To choose a shot, you simply position the DBS on its thumbnail. This can be done by simply clicking on the shot using the mouse, or by tapping it using the pen if you use a tablet. Now the DBS will either be somewhere in the Cuts view, or it can be used to select shots in the gallery. Note that the DBS is always visible somewhere in the Baselight UI. To choose a shot in the gallery, you simply click on the shot you want to select. Now, if you're working on a blackboard or slate control panel, you have a button which will toggle the DBS between the Cuts view and the gallery. And the DBS is shown dimmed when the focus is in the other view. Now the DBS also has its own dedicated set of navigation buttons on the blackboard or slate. And I've got a copy here of the relevant page from the Blackboard User Guide if you don't have a panel on your system. And you can see that there are 4 buttons, left, right, up and down, which move the DBS around the gallery, or if you're in the Cuts view, obviously only the left and right buttons will normally move it, unless you're in expanded Cuts view mode, and we'll have a look at that a bit later on. So what can you do with a shot once you've selected it using the DBS? Well, the first thing is to simply use it as a quick way to jump to a shot. You move the DBS to the shot you want to jump to, and you press the Go to DBS button on the blackboard or slate. This allows you to jump directly to a specific shot using buttons on the control panel without having to pick up the mouse or use a pen on the tablet. In fact, the DBS navigation buttons were added to the blackboard control panel very early on in the development of Baselight, when many colorists preferred not to use a mouse or tablet and wanted to do everything quickly using controls and buttons on the main grading panel. Note that if you're using the mouse and would prefer to jump to a shot, i.e. move the cursor by clicking on it, rather than move the DBS to that shot by clicking on it, you can change the navigation option to click to navigate in the right-click menu in the Cuts view. However, if you change this option, you'll also then need to set the DBS movement option to either option click or command click, or on a Linux system these would be alt click or control click. So you can still move the DBS using the mouse, but you need to hold down another key. So aside from acting as a timeline navigation tool, the DBS serves 2 main purposes. Either to select a shot as a grade source to copy that shot's grade to another shot, or to add shots to a group selection. So let's look at these 2 cases. Firstly, applying the grade from one shot to another shot. So with the DBS sitting on a shot, which can either be in the cuts view or the gallery, you can immediately copy the grade from that shot to the shot at the current cursor. The quickest way to do that is to just simply press the apply button on the blackboard. Or if you don't have a blackboard, you can use the keyboard shortcut quote. That's single quote on the keyboard. And there's also an apply button on the user interface in both the cuts view and the gallery, and you obviously click on the apply button according to where the DBS currently is. Note that the actual copy-paste operation, in other words, which strips from the source stack will be copied onto the destination stack, is determined by the copy-paste apply options, which can be set from the menu. Which can be set from the edit menu here. Another setting which affects what is pasted onto the destination shot is the Apply Options button. And note this button is present on both the cuts view and in the gallery. And beware that they have separate settings. So if you choose to paste, say for example, just the primaries, that's layers which do not include a matte, from shots in the gallery, this setting will not affect the setting in the cuts view. So if you want to paste primaries from there, you'd need to also set it on the Apply Options button in the cuts view. And the Apply Options can also be set from the right-click menu in either the cuts view or the gallery. We'll be looking at copying and pasting grades and using the gallery in more detail in another tutorial. However, one other useful quick way to paste a grade is to hold the Shift key while you click on a shot, and this works either for shots in the cuts view or the gallery, and this will apply the grade immediately from the shot you click on onto the current shot at the cursor, and it uses the same copy and apply options as when you're using the DBS to copy. However, in this case the DBS is not actually involved, so it stays where it is. Okay, so the second use of the DBS is for creating a group of shots. So with the DBS sitting on a shot in the cuts view, you simply press the select button on the blackboard. This is the one in the middle of the DBS navigation buttons. The shot is now shown with a red outline, indicating that it's part of the current group selection. And note that as the DBS is still positioned on the same shot, you see both the red outline and the blue DBS on the same thumbnail. Now, if you're not using the blackboard or slate panel, you can simply add an individual shot to a group by clicking on it using the middle mouse button. And note that the DBS again does not need to be on the shot if you're just using the mouse to add the shot to the group. But the DBS can also be used to quickly set a range of shots to add to the current group selection. First of all, you position the DBS at the first shot you want to include in the group selection, and then move the cursor to the last shot you want to include. And this can be done quickly without using the mouse, simply by using the DBS navigation controls and the separate cursor navigation controls on the blackboard control panel or the slate. You then simply press the Select Deselect All or Set Des All button on the blackboard or slate, and all the shots between the DBS and the cursor, including the shots at the DBS and the cursor themselves, will all be added to the group and become outlined in red. Now again, there is a keyboard shortcut for this for those of you who don't have a control panel, and that is Control or Command, Shift and Enter on the keyboard. Now note that this is a toggle operation, so if I press the Select Deselect All button on the blackboard again, it will deselect the range of shots between the DBS and the cursor. And you can now add additional ranges to the current group simply by moving the DBS and or the cursor. So you can select an additional range and then press the Select Deselect All button, and it'll add those shots to the current group. Now, groups have several uses within Baselight. However, we're not going to cover them today. So let's have a look at the cuts view in a bit more detail. Well, obviously it gives you a thumbnail view of the scene. And the thumbnails can be scaled by dragging on the top or the bottom of the cuts view. Now, if this doesn't work, try holding down Control or Command while you drag, because the height of the cuts view may be locked by default. Now, if you drag the height of the cuts view beyond a certain limit, you'll notice that the single row of thumbnails splits into two rows. And in fact, if you've got a big scene, if you carry on dragging all the way to the top of the screen, it will get filled with a grid of thumbnails. And this is a useful way of viewing the whole scene as a storyboard, because the thumbnails are still in time order. And this is often actually set up as a specific expanded workspace view that you can add to your workspaces and then quickly toggle using the workspace shortcuts. And again, on the blackboard, this can be mapped to the expand button on the blackboard buttons. So you can very quickly toggle using one button to the expanded cuts view workspace. Now, as with thumbnails in other places in Baselight, moving the mouse pointer to the top edge of a thumbnail will bring up a scrub bar. And if you click and drag, you can scrub through the shot. The current cursor is also shown in the cuts view with its cursor number. Now, by default, the cursor in the cuts view always remains fixed in the center of the cuts view, and as you play back, the thumbnails scroll behind the cursor. You normally can't change the order of shots in the timeline by dragging on a thumbnail. In fact, if you try, the cuts view will simply scroll along in the direction you drag. Now, if you do that, then the cursor will no longer be fixed in the center of the cuts view, and when you now press playback, the cuts view remains fixed, and the cursor will move along the cuts view until it disappears off the edge of the screen. Now, if you want to revert back to the fixed cursor mode, then you can lock it back to the center of the cuts view by enabling the scroll lock button. Note that there's actually a preference setting in the cuts view preferences to automatically turn on the scroll lock whenever you press play. So in many cases, you don't want to change the order of shots in the timeline. However, if you do want to reorder them, you can enable the Allow drag and drop shot movement in the cuts view preferences. And with this enabled, I can now drag a shot to another place in the scene. And note that I actually have to start off by dragging the shot upwards, not sideways. And then I can move the shot to its new place in the cuts view. And you'll see that as I move the drag shot over the cuts view, I can either drop it on top of another shot, in which case the shot isn't actually moved, but its grade is pasted, or I can drop it between two shots to move the shot there. Now, we'll be covering the copy and pasting of grades using drag and drop in another session. It's also possible to show certain metadata below the thumbnails, and you get to that by right-clicking on the thumbnail and then choosing metadata display. But of course, the more metadata you try and add below the thumbnail, the smaller the fields become, and after a while it can get a bit small to see what's going on. So it's best to just leave only one or two metadata fields visible. The right-click menu also has options to change the paste apply options, as I've already mentioned, as well as changing the mouse click navigation. And there's also an option to lock the DBS to the cursor position. If this is enabled, whenever the active cursor is moved, the DBS will automatically move to sit on the same shot containing the cursor. This option can also be toggled on and off using the DBS lock button here. Now, a useful feature is the DBS lock offset. you can set a number of frames to offset the DBS from the cursor. This means, for example, that you can have the DBS positioned one shot behind the current shot. In other words, it's always going to be a shot behind where the cursor is. And this allows you to quickly paste the grade from the previous shot onto the current shot. So as you move along the timeline, you can simply add a grade and then paste it to the current shot, make an adjustment and move on to the next. And you do that simply by moving to the next shot, then just hitting the apply button, either on the blackboard or using the comma shortcut on the keyboard. If you've got a scene where the cut is switching between two camera angles, you could set this offset to -2, and then you'd be pasting the grade from 2 shots away. So it would be the same camera angle each time. So you could set up 2 different grades, one for each camera, and then you could simply step through the scene shot by shot and quickly add the same grade onto each camera and make small adjustments if you need to as you go along. Now you may have noticed that as soon as you manually move the DBS to another shot, the DBS lock is turned off. This allows you to place the DBS on a specific shot and then quickly paste the grade from that shot onto different individual shots, one after another, simply by selecting them with the cursor and then each time pressing the apply button. Now normally the DBS will remain unlocked from the cursor until you manually lock it again by pressing the DBS lock button. However, you can set it so that as soon as you press play, the lock is automatically turned on. And this is another setting in the Cuts View section of the preferences. Note that an interesting use of the DBS lock button is to enable the selection and deselection of all the shots in the timeline as a group. So if the DBS lock is currently turned on, then when you press the select deselect all button on the blackboard or slate, or control or command shift and enter on the keyboard, it will toggle the selection or deselection of all the shots in the timeline as a group. So a quick way to select all the shots in the timeline as a group is to first of all enable the DBS lock button and then press the select deselect all button or command control shift and enter. So let's have a quick look at the shots view. The shots view is another way of viewing the shots in your scene. The cuts view is a time-based view, whereas the shots view can be arranged with the shots in any order. And you can even filter what shots you see. However, it's still showing you the same shots as the cuts view, so the DBS is also shown in the shots view. So whichever shot has the DBS in the cuts view will also have the DBS in the shots view. And just like the cuts view, you can move the DBS in the shots view using the DBS navigation buttons on the blackboard. Or if you want to use the mouse, the Customize menu in the shots view allows you to choose the click method for moving the DBS and also for moving the cursor. The DBS also serves as a way to compare shots. So let me just show you where else it's used in Baselight for that purpose. First of all, to just simply view the shot at the current DBS position, all you have to do is press the View button on the blackboard or the slate. And this will show you the current DBS shot wherever it is. So it could be in the gallery, it could be in the cuts view, or it could be in the shots view. And so when you press that, it will toggle from the current cursor output to the current DBS shot. And the description in the image display changes from current cursor to DBS to remind you that you're actually looking at the DBS shot. If you don't have a blackboard, there is a keyboard shortcut for view, which is the semicolon key. Also, when you're using view modes on the blackboard, view mode 3 will show the current cursor side by side with the DBS shot. Now this is not a multiple cursor view, this is just a single cursor view. It'll show you the current cursor and the DBS shot next to it. And view mode 4 will show you the current cursor wiped against the DBS shot. Now again, this isn't to wipe between two cursors. This is one of the Blackboard view modes. And again, we'll be looking at more specific Blackboard features in another tutorial. However, if you don't have a Blackboard or a slate, you can access these view modes using the keyboard shortcuts, and that's Alt, Control and 3 for view mode 3, or if you're on a Mac that would be Option Command 3, and for view mode 4 it's Alt Control 4 or Option Command 4 on a Mac. And finally, if you open up the layers view, you'll notice that there's a mode where you can view the two stacks, the one for the current shot and the one for the DBS shot side by side. So this not only provides an easy way to compare the stacks of the DBS shot and the current shot, but also it can be used as a way of copying individual layers from the DBS shot into the current shot. And again, this is something we'll be covering later in the session on copying and pasting. Okay, so yeah, there was just one question during that session, and that was just regarding the gallery as adding the current scene as a gallery. And yeah, that was a feature that we added relatively recently. The expanded cuts view was something we put on a long time ago as a very quick way from the Blackboard to get a storyboard view of all the shots in your scene. So there are, as with a lot of things in Baselight, there are multiple ways of doing the same thing or seeing the same thing. Also, I noticed one thing I should clarify when I was referring to the DBS offset. I think I said frames when I actually meant shots. So the number you type into the field next to the DBS lock button is the number of shots you want to offset it by, and a negative number means the DBS will be to the left of the current cursor. Anyway, thanks again for joining me. I hope you found that useful. The recording will be available online in a few days' time. So we'll see you next time. Bye for now.